We have Sawn Alito here is to deliver a message from the Assembly of First Nations. Is the AFN National Chief, Sawn Alito, Chief Alito, what? Atleo. Okay. You know, it seems like every time I get up here, these guys like to correct me. But, you know, they could put phonetically Atleo. But okay. The regional chief traditional teachings have a guide to serve First Nations as facilitator, as mediator, as planner, as teacher. I would like you to help me welcome the chief. Just leave it to the chief.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Atleo, umatikwitasnish, nuchonoflat. The name that I carry is actually, it's Atleo in the English version, but Atleo, because my relatives, I heard an elder from the Makah people speak earlier today. And so where is the Makah relatives of mine? Chu, how are you? Good to see my relatives from across the strait. I come from the village of Ahousit, part of Nuchanoth, west coast of Vancouver Island, Tlakishbeet Ma'as. The House of Tlakishbeet, we are relatives across a border we didn't create and fellow whale hunters, as it were, over the course of our history. And so we're still hunting big whales, right? Still hunting big whales. President Keel and to your executive council, to the vice presidents, all of you, thank you so much for your warm welcome here today. Recently, delegates, representatives from the Assembly of First Nations, I have the privilege of serving as National Chief for the last 3 years and just returned this summer for another 3 years. Our officials, our senior officials, our Chief Executive Officer is here, Richard Jock. Can you just stand up and be acknowledged so people know that you're here? He's at the back there. Good, hard lacrosse playing Mohawk. His community, Akwesasne, straddles the borders of New York, Ontario, and Quebec. And Jackie, I guess he was recently met with you. Thank you so much for those important conversations. And Jefferson, thank you so much as well. President, congratulations. This is our first real opportunity to speak since you were also returned to office. And it's so intriguing for us as delegates and relatives from the other side of the border, from the north, to be here. And we appreciate this moment. We also have Grand Chief Edward John in the room somewhere. He's a North American representative. So he's just back there, everyone. Acknowledge Grand Chief Edward John. His home community is in northern British Columbia, but he serves as the North American representative on the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. And I know that the Grand Chief is making a presentation here tomorrow. And your president, President Keel, and I, we had a chance just to touch base briefly and reflect on this moment, a moment that here you're gathered before an election here in the United States. We have for ourselves in Canada. We have Prime Minister Stephen Harper is the current Prime Minister in Canada, and he has another 3 years in front of him. So the President and I just really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation here, and particularly with the backdrop being the theme that you have chosen, our rights and our sovereignty. My message that I would like to offer reflects, I think, that your theme and the shared theme that we have amongst the over 600 First Nations from coast to coast to coast in what is now called Canada, and over 50 languages, and there's so many connections that we have as Indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island, and really highlight the opportunities that we see in moving together in our work. So many similarities, I think, and I believe that we are in a true moment of reckoning for all of us to capitalize on shared priorities and our goals to achieve a better day for our peoples across North America and around the world. I also feel strongly, as our people do, that we have important responsibilities, not only to our peoples and to our lands, to the rights and treaties that the ancestors have left for us to bring forward, but to Indigenous brothers and sisters around the world as well. You think about chiefs, tribal leaders being targeted, their very lives being threatened in places like South America. It reminds us of our interconnection, umatikutashnis, hishuknishtawak, that we are all one and connected, not only as Indigenous peoples, but as human beings with others on this place that we call Mother Earth, and with all living things as well. And there's been a tremendous imbalance that's come into all of our lives. So it's important that we stand on our sovereignty, stand on our rights, to create healthy, sustainable, and thriving communities for our peoples to learn and to grow. I believe that after centuries of struggle and strife, that now is the time of our peoples, of Indigenous peoples. It's a time of our cultures, of our economies, our languages, and of our nations. It's also important that we heed the instruction, encouragement of the elders. Hope beats that, they remind us, ha hopes that, teach one another. And so we too have important lessons to learn from the work that you're undertaking here, coming together as tribal leaders and as tribal governments. It seems that your efforts in reaching out, the struggles in your reaching out to governments, including the one that is now in power, that there is an effort that we can see is working, that you're pushing this government to be a willing partner to, as we've just heard, jointly address some of the challenges and priorities, and as is always acknowledged, that there is so much more to do. The challenges are so great. This type of commitment, the effort to have governments working in partnership, has been, I might add, a great challenge north of the border. First Nations have pressed hard for change and for genuine collaboration. Despite our best efforts, First Nations in Canada are frustrated by lack of government commitment to advance the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the words so important around the world that compel mutual respect and partnership. We continue to reject unilateral moves by government to regulate our lands, and we fight hard for corporations to take our rights and our realities seriously. For my relatives amongst the Makah and for other coastal peoples in the West, just today I got a note that there are over 4,000 people gathered on the lawns of the legislature of British Columbia in my home province, not far from my village, in an action to defend our coast against environmental degradation from oil spills. And this is the work of our peoples, to stand up for our territories, for the fish, and for the water. It's a reminder that we have so much more work to do, and we welcome the chance to learn with you and to work with you. I believe we can strengthen one another, seeking and achieving solutions not for our people, but by our people, consistent with our rights. Our peoples have much in common, and all in this room are familiar with our kinship, as I've been saying here. Whether it's the Dene and the Yukon, the Northwest Territories and Northern Alberta sharing the same dialects with the Apache and Navajo in California and Arizona, the Indigenous peoples in my territories, up to the north to Alaska, down through British Columbia to Vancouver Island, south to Washington and Oregon. We're talking about a shared lineage, heritage, and customs. It's been 25 years since the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Yet we know that our people had already been trading freely amongst each other for thousands of years. In fact, 800 years ago, the ancient city of Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, was bigger than any city in Europe at the time, including London or Paris. Cahokia being built upon trade with the Indigenous peoples of the North, some of whom traveled from smaller trade centers located in what is now Toronto and Winnipeg, as well as those peoples from the southern part of the United States and Mexico. Trade not being limited to between our peoples. In the past few years, archaeologists have found Chinese coins that are 300 to 400 years old in Alaska and the Yukon. In fact, the Tlingit used these coins to decorate clothing. So let's face it, both of our respective countries, the United States and Canada, would not be two of the wealthiest nations in the world if it were not for the natural resources of our territories. When our people signed treaties with the Crown, it was understood that The land we agreed to share with the newcomers would equally benefit everyone, for as long as the sun shines, the rivers flow, and the grass grows. When the chiefs in Northern Ontario signed treaties 150 years ago, they said they felt, and I quote, the rustling of gold underneath our feet, and they expected a fair share of that wealth. We heard the story of the city of Sacramento from the governor earlier. Wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the gold rush of the 1840s and the 1850s. The same can be said for Whitehorse and Dawson City in the Yukon, Fairbanks and Skagway in Alaska during the second gold rush of the 1890s. And so now, as I heard emphasized so clearly here in your gathering today, we have a 21st century gold rush amongst us. Not only does it include precious metals, but also the new gold, energy. And the main market for those resources are the same people we've traded with along the Pacific Northwest 300 years ago. We are all witness to the global economic shifts and the growing importance of natural resources and the balance of our rights. In recent months, and I spoke with President Kiel about this very topic just briefly a little while ago, it's about China investing billions of dollars in Canadian mining companies. As we speak, China's national oil company made a bid to buy one of Canada's largest energy companies called Nexen. World leader after world leader, including Indigenous leaders, are looking much more closely at their relationship with Asia and countries beyond. Just a year ago, I accompanied a number of First Nations leaders and representatives of our business community on a mission of friendship and trade to China. Over the course of 10 days, we met with dozens of Chinese politicians and business leaders who are eager to do business with us. From natural resources to tourism to agriculture, they're wondering how to feed a population, how to provide things like protein. While we were there, First Nations Grain Management, based out of Alberta, they opened an office in the port city of Dalian. The Lakwalam First Nation in BC now has an office in Beijing. And last year, they sold $40 million worth of lumber to China. Food grown and raised by First Nations, particularly grains, beef, and as I mentioned, fish, is also a fast-growing export to Asia. There's many other stories. You may have heard of One Earth Farms, targeting 1 million acres of First Nations land in order to grow wheat and raise cattle for markets in North America and beyond. Or First Nations in the Atlantic coast, selling their catch, their fish tuna catch, directly to buyers in Japan. We also, when we were there, met with China Investment Corporation, which is perhaps the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, with at least $410 billion to invest in foreign operations. This fund has only one foreign office, and it happens to be located in Toronto, because the Chinese realize there is much potential in Canada's resources. For example, in the last several years, Chinese mining and exploration companies have sought partnership agreements with First Nations in Northern Ontario. You may have heard of this region, referred to as the Ring of Fire. This area in Northern Ontario has the potential to generate tens of billions of dollars in revenue for the economies of both Ontario and Canada. Its importance has ensured great prominent references in the 2012 federal and provincial budgets as one of the great economic opportunities of the 21st century. Our people and our lands hold tremendous potential for economic relationships, domestically and abroad. This is something we share. A common goal to ensure our fair share. But there are compelling reasons to be part of the strategy, part of a new relationship, but certainly not at any cost. And let me start with a few of the reasons. First of all, in Canada, north of the border, First Nations are the fastest growing segment of the Canadian population. I am now officially old when it comes to our people. Over half of our First Nation citizens are under the age of 25, particularly in stark contrast with an aging mainstream Canadian population. So when you combine these aspects, this growth with the reality of the aging mainstream population, experiencing 3 times higher rates of unemployment, the math becomes painfully obvious, not just for our communities, but for all of Canada. And we can invest in our people to benefit all Canadians or continue paying the price to perpetuate poverty. Canada's economic fundamentals require greater economic participation of our quickly growing population. Research shows us that closing the skills and education gaps between First Nations and the rest of the population will generate $400 billion within a generation and save Canada $115 billion in social costs. Our rights, treaties, and the environment cannot, and we assure will not be disregarded in the process. We need to find ways to bring life and to respect to each other. I certainly know what a major issue job creation is for everybody right now. In our case, besides natural resource development, green energy, which we hear being talked so much about here, also has the potential for our peoples to lead the way with wind and solar technologies. Not only will preserving the land for generations to come serve as a priority, but being a major contributor to the North American economy is a priority as well. We have so many examples, whether it's Henvey Inlet First Nation, north of Niagara Falls, where we joined together and held the International Indigenous Summit on Energy and Mining in partnership with the National Congress of American Indians, where we emphasized there, President Keel, you emphasized that it is our sovereign duty, and I agree, as Indigenous people, as tribal leaders, as First Nations of this land, to be responsible for the management of our energy and natural resources. First Nations and American Indians must do so together, and I get questions all the time from tribal leaders and citizens from this side of the border asking about what's happening in the north, whether it's the discussion about Keystone Pipeline in the east, or as I've referenced here, why 4,000 individuals are gathered in southern Vancouver Island is the Gateway Pipeline proposal in northern British Columbia that our people are standing firmly against, and I and the Assembly of First Nations are standing in full support of those First Nations in their position. So this is work that we must undertake together. As a result of the collaboration between the Assembly of First Nations and the National Congress of American Indians, our organizations agreed to chart a path for tribally driven development of Indigenous resources on Indigenous territory in North America, where Indigenous nations are ready, willing, and have a central role. We have also held a caucus of Indigenous delegates from North America, and there was a stated desire and commitment to build Indigenous capacity on energy and development. This was one aspect that came out of our International Indigenous Energy and Mining Summit, and to the President and to his colleagues on the executive, the idea of a virtual institute, a North American virtual institute on energy and mining, so that we can make sure that we're supporting the development of capacity and a focus to support tribally led, First Nations led solutions to the challenges and opportunities with energy and natural resources. We also want to suggest the examination of a possibility of a North American Indigenous task force on energy that would be comprised of representative organizations. We are also beginning to work together in other areas, important areas that were just referenced, the recognition and proper support of our veterans. This is very important to the leadership of First Nations across Canada as well. Our people have had a long history of service with the Canadian Forces, in many instances enlisting incredible numbers, just as we've heard here today. We also, delegates, have touched briefly earlier today on thinking about the 2014 World Conference on Indigenous Peoples that Grand Chief John, I know, will be referencing right in your presentation tomorrow as well. Because the President and I we were just reflecting for one another, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We're very happy that respective nation states endorsed it, and Canada and the U.S. were two of the final countries to sign on. And I suggest that we help Canada and the U.S. really provide a leadership role as we look to places like Central and South in Latin America, where tribal leaders have their lives threatened when they stand up for their rights, that there should be leadership shown here in North America, because it is important not only for our people, but important to support Indigenous peoples around the world. And so there will be this World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in New York that will be adjacent to the United Nations General Assembly. So when we think about the tribal leaders in Brazil, in the Amazon, we think about the important opportunity for us as Indigenous peoples in North America to work together and to encourage continued progress and work with the respective nation states. At our last Winter Assembly, a couple other points to touch on. We have a Grand Chief from Richard's community of Akwesasne. His name is Mike Mitchell. He brought forward a resolution to our National Assembly calling for an International Indigenous Border Security Summit to take place in Akwesasne in May of 2013. And so we look forward to working with you, the National Congress, as well, to bring together Indigenous leaders and governments to ensure that our inherent treaty rights to travel and to trade freely are protected and enhanced on Turtle Island. This summit would be an excellent opportunity to assert that the border that was imposed on us must no longer restrain our communities, separate our nations, or impede our economies. So these are just some of the important first steps in the transformation that I'm sure we can all agree is essential to achieving a better quality of life for Indigenous peoples in our territories. Our rights in the processes that exist in Canada, including the environmental assessment processes for major projects like pipelines, have never properly been addressed. We must see a clear and explicit commitment for our rights and interests to be addressed, because these not only impact our people, they impact the rights of our relatives on this side of the border. First Nations will stand firm in our rights and our responsibilities to protect the sustainability of our lands and our resources. The world over, relationship building continues to be, as we know, a key to economic success. We demand no less. We compel corporations to learn from us and build relationships at the various earliest stages of development, just like they do when they travel the world. A back-end requirement for consultation simply does not work. Relationship building is needed to create the path forward in protecting the environment and unleashing economic potential through North America. So you see, our economic visions are not dissimilar. Sustainable, healthy communities and families are central to our overall success. Our Indigenous values, our traditional knowledge, and our connection to our lands and waters is and will always be an unshakable bond. As I mentioned, the UN Declaration, we only look to Article 32, which states, Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. And international experts assert that Indigenous peoples enjoy permanent sovereignty of natural resources. I believe that that declaration, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is an important guide, and we must use it together. In closing, let me summarize that the economic imperative is clear, and we all have much at stake. Our nations and our countries. We know what we are capable of doing. It's something that the peoples that built Cahokia 800 years ago knew at that time. Now is the time to rebuild the spirit of Cahokia for the 21st century. First Nations and Indian tribes will become increasingly important economic agents. We will unleash our own potential and support sustainable economies in North America's critical resource sector, labor force, and economy. And we can capitalize on the opportunity to do this together. For we are truly stronger together. Unique in our cultures, traditions, and ceremony for sure, but similar in our resilience and our plans for success for our peoples. Whether it's through trade, agriculture, mining, fishery, forestry, energy, or emerging technologies, our nations and our rights are a reality, and they present unlimited opportunities. Our rights and our sovereignty will allow us to use our resources to build our economies. From Arizona to Alberta, from Ontario to Oklahoma, Indigenous peoples will be the agents of change. For the sake of the land, the sake of our children, we can and we must create a new age of prosperity for all. Make no mistake, I firmly believe that this is an important moment of reckoning, a moment of rare opportunity for us as Indigenous peoples here in North America to stand up for our peoples, stand up for Indigenous peoples here as well as globally. And we have a responsibility to one another as brothers and sisters, and to those who are far more worse off than us in other communities around the globe. We must stand together, grounded in our rights and our sovereignty for this generation and the next. Let our voices, our successes be a beacon for Indigenous peoples internationally, and let us showcase our strength together for this generation and the next. True, Teko, Teko. Thank you very much.
We have a gift for you before you go.
Excellent, excellent. Let me get a picture with the picture here. All right. Okay. One more.
All right.
I'm the cute one.
All right.